Good evening. This is Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. I am your host, Dr. Sundiata Kaita Chajua, and today we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Ashley Howard. Now, Real Talk explores Black history, the historic and contemporary socioeconomic conditions, and the class-based ideology and strategies and tactics of the Black liberation movement through an interview format with leading scholar activists. Ashley Howard earned a PhD in history from the University of Illinois. She joined the faculty at the University of Iowa in 2019. She came from Loyola University of New Orleans immediately. Her research interests include African Americans in the Midwest, the intersection between race, class, and gender, and the global history of racial violence. Her new book, Midwest Unrest, 1960s Urban Rebellions and the Black Freedom Movement, recently was published by North Carolina Press. It analyzes the uprisings grounded in the ways race, class, gender, and region played overlapping roles in defining resistance to racialized oppression. Dr. Howard's work has appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education, BBC World News Hour, AI, Al Jazeera, Financial Times, and Washington Post, as well as NPR. As an educator, Dr. Howard's primary goal is to teach students to be effective writers, critical thinkers, and active world citizens. Students in her classes develop skills through hands-on learning, like processing questionnaires for the Louisiana on lockdown report, which we will work in and ask her about. She is also dedicated to sharing her scholarly knowledge outside the traditional campus community. Specifically, Howard has greatly valued teaching opportunities where she can provide quality university level education to those with limited access, including underserved schools and correctional facilities. She is the recipient of several awards, including in 2024, the James N. Murray Faculty Award, awarded by the University of Iowa Division of Student Life, and 2022 Mellon Foundation grant recipient with co-PI Colin Gordon, and the Dorothy Swinner Award, honorable mention awarded by the Midwest Historical Association. Now, she's got several articles, which I won't go through, and I just want to welcome you, Ash, to Real Talk.
Thank you. I'm so
Um,
glad to be here.
it is wonderful to see you. And Real Talk, we're informal. So, other than the introduction, we get rid of those hierarchical titles and those things. So, it's brother, sister, comrade, Ash, and Sundi. All right. So, I'm a devotee of William Cross, Bill. Um, his Nigrescence theory, I do believe, is the best way to analyze the development of a Black political consciousness. And so Cross was interested in what he called at the time the Negro to Black conversion experience. And so I've structured my interviews to always begin with biographical questions, right? To try and explore my guest's social and political background. So I'm interested in what psychologists call the critical incidents. That is, what were the salient experiences, those experiences that had a profound impact that helped shape you as a person, shape your particular scholarly interests and your intellectual and political interpretive frameworks. So let me begin with, can you discuss where you were born? What historical period did you come of age, and your family background, and whether you come from an activist family tradition or not?
Yeah, so I proudly, and I mean, if you know one thing about me, you know this about me, and that is I proudly come from Omaha, Nebraska. I am an Omaha nationalist. I love Omaha,
You
although
are?
17-year-old Ashley couldn't wait to get out, but old lady Ashley realized there's something happening in the Midwest, and so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and so this was kind of really a kind of a transitional moment in Black America. It's the aftermath of the Black freedom movement. It's the rise of the radical right. It's the me generation. It's the decline of a lot of industries in these places. So that was kind of the time and place that I grew up. um, my folks, I grew up middle class, but my folks have working people jobs. Like my dad worked for the utilities company, my mom's a nurse, and they very much always kind of instilled this idea of hard work and education, right? And so those two things are something that people can never take from you. Your
Yeah.
work ethic, and your education. And so, for me, it's kind of hard to pinpoint these moments of kind of radical transformation, because you don't quite know what they are until you look
You
back.
look back, right?
Right. And so, for my own, I have plenty of kind of anecdotes about how I came to this research. But for my own kind of, racial development, it was just always kind of like the waters I swam in terms of the
Hmm.
books I'm interested in, or the films, or the things I gravitated to. I mean, I remember as like a fourth grader reading a book that I probably should not have been reading as a fourth grader, about Josephine Baker, and reading about
Mm.
slavery and the civil rights movement. I rented as an eighth grader the entire run on Eyes of the Prize and watched it. Right. Like, so like that's the kind of nerdy kid I was. Like I was hungry for this kind of information. But I grew up in primarily white institutions. My mother is white. And I think for a lot of kids that can be disorienting. But I grew up in a space that always affirmed my blackness. I remember as maybe like in seventh or eighth grader, a lot of the girls in my junior high were getting like these rings that had like an Irish heart, like being held by hands.
Mm.
I desperately wanted one because that's what all the cool girls were going to have. And my mom's like, but you're not white. You're not Irish. Like, be proud of who you are. Don't try to be who these girls are. And so, even coming from my mother, who had no skin, right? Quite literally in that game,
Yeah, a game, yeah.
she always encouraged me to be proud of who I was. And my dad got me like this 365-day, like, Black history calendar, and every day had like a new thing. And so really, if we're thinking about like my, villain origin story, it's their fault I became a PhD doctor and not an MD doctor. Because had they given me a stethoscope, or, like, sent me to science camp, I'd be a different person. So
But
that's
Ash, let me interject here now. Uh, Not an attack on your generation, but probably it is. Most of your generation pursued a kind of public intellectual, cozying up to the center right, cowardly career.
yeah,
You didn't, so that's what I'm trying to get at. What are the distinguishing experiences that you interpreted
yeah.
later that led you toward a radical path when there's a broad liberal, neoliberal highway out there that most of your generation has sped down?
Yeah, yeah. And so, here's the thing. Although my parents would never use these words, right? I grew up in a house that had a class consciousness, that had a social justice orientation. Again, my folks this day would not use those words, but it is how they treated people. It is how they saw struggle. I was grocery shopping with my mom once when I was a little girl, and we saw someone steal a loaf of bread, and I was like, Mom, we should tell somebody, right? Like, stealing's wrong. And she's like, if you have to steal bread, like, that, the crime is not stealing bread. The crime is that you have
That you
to,
have to steal bread.
right?
Yes.
Like, that is a class, that is a working class
Yeah,
orientation.
no, absolutely. Well,
but
you
that's
know,
not it. Yeah,
theft, according to Marx, is the first form of resistance to capital.
this.
So yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so I think there's that. I was educated in Catholic schools and Catholic schools that really saw it as its mission.
Jesuit Jesuit schools.
Yes and no. My first job out of grad school was Jesuit school. Lots of my peers went to Jesuit schools, but I went to a Sacred Heart school. And so it very much was like, impelling yourself into the world for direct action and thinking about transformational justice, not just, charity where we go in and we serve soup and it's great, but looking at the root causes. So like Catholic social teaching, those type of
Hmm.
liberation theology, like that very much was part of my education growing up, and also just how my parents chose to live their lives, right? In
Yes.
thinking about who they're going to stand in solidarity with, what justice looks like for people. These became really formative moments. And, as I found a diary entry, and it was the day that we
You
invaded.
kept a diary.
I
You were
probably
one of
kept like
them.
yeah, I was like, I probably kept 3 pages of a diary. This one has made it through the years. It was 91, so I was 10. And I was like, it was on Martin Luther King Day. We bombed Iraq. And I said, what a man who fought
Mm.
for peace and freedom, what a day to start a war. Right. So I'm already,
Wow.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
already
yeah.
oriented that way as a 10-year-old. And again, it's just the kind of stew that I'm swimming in. I always wanted to make the world a better place because I knew the world could be a better place. And I think given that I was growing up in a biracial family, I could see so clearly my father's family's experiences and trajectory,
Hmm.
others' families' experiences and trajectory. And, they're both growing up in Nebraska, but that race played such a major factor. And so I was keyed into that very early. And I think, unlike many kids who are mixed race, Black was never a four-letter word in my house, right? Like it wasn't necessarily a
Hmm.
biracial, thing. It's like we're Black, like we're a Black family with a white mom, and
Yeah.
and and that kind of empowered me to pursue justice and to pursue these struggles um, with a great deal of commitment because I didn't see myself as separate from these people, but that this is my struggle. And it's rather late in life, but the big moment that hammered that home was Katrina, right? I had never
Mm.
been in New Orleans, but like if we could pinpoint a single moment of kind of like my Black radical identity formation, it is that because I remember
So what was it about Katrina? And you were in New Orleans at the time, right?
this was before I moved to New Orleans.
Okay,
So
that was before you moved. Okay.
yeah, it was before I moved, but I'd always been fascinated with the city, right? This, Black
Right.
American city, Caribbean city, right? This Northern Caribbean city. Um, and I saw people who looked like me and looked like my family begging, pleading for help, and everybody turning a blind eye. Or
Yeah.
worse yet, everybody blaming them for this natural
Yes.
disaster. And we know there's no such thing as a natural disaster. They are unnatural disasters.
They're social catastrophes. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And and it was just like one of these things that I'm watching it with my friends, with my boyfriend at the time. I'm not saying this was the thing that led to our demise, but it certainly didn't help. And just
Good.
having yeah, my
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
And had just such radically different ideas of how we were interpreting the same thing. And
Yeah.
that kind of keyed me into, oh, I am different and I have a different obligation to this world than these shabby people want to do.
And I'm glad that you made that point because romance must be guided by politics.
I mean,
So,
that is the least romantic thing to have ever been said, but it's also probably the most true thing that's ever been
yeah.
said.
So Ash, I want to turn to this wonderful book that you've written, that you've given, bequeathed to the world. And so we know that, you labor over a title and oftentimes the press then imposes one on you. But but beyond that, the point is that titles inform the potential reader, right, of what the main theme and the ideas is going to explore. So I want to begin by asking you to explicate your title,
Oh yeah.
Midwest Unrest. Now, I know you're
Hmm.
going for more than the alliteration here, but 1960s urban rebellions and the Black Freedom Movement. So first, can you talk about this, the region, what are the geographical contours of the Midwest in your framing, and can you discuss it as a regional political economy, cultural matrix, and how Black people function within it?
Absolutely. And before we get that, I'm proud to say I chose Midwest as in rest. But the dissertation and the working title up until it was about ready to get like printed and out there was Prairie Fires. But
Yeah,
the biography on Laura Ingalls Wilder is called Prairie Fires.
yeah,
How
that is
does
true.
anything on fire? She wasn't out in the street, and yet she got my title. And so I had to pivot, but
Okay, okay.
it works because it is alliterative. It rhymes. It has a certain snappiness
Yeah,
to it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it also helps locate these things which are like temporally and geographically discordant in the popular imagination, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
this was a project
Mm-hmm.
that started long before Ferguson, that started long before,
Right.
Minneapolis in 2020. And when I would tell people about my research, they're like, no, 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 no. You don't mean the Midwest. You mean someplace like could not even imagine that there are uprisings in the Midwest. So, that's part of it. And so, I love that you asked this question right out of the gate because, at these Midwestern history, you know, spaces, like them's fighting words. Like, what's the Midwest? Like, people,
Yeah, yeah.
they,
Oh, yeah.
they want to get up about this. And it's challenging because it's a fluid definition, right? It
Right.
changes with the time period, it changes with who you're looking at. And so I'm part of an organization called the Black Midwest Initiative. And they really extend the Black Midwest out to include places like Buffalo and Syracuse. Because on the face of it, right, someplace like Detroit or East Lansing or Flint or Gary have more in common with Syracuse and Buffalo, New York, than, let's say downstate Illinois, like Illinois, right?
Oh,
Like,
other than other than the industrial cities, yeah.
but like if we look at those places over time, there's no through line there, right? But if we're looking at it as this industrial matrix, like you said,
Yeah.
so that part. And then the other thing is this cultural matrix. And I argue in the book that it's the Midwestern myth, right? And so
Mm,
this idea that people are coming to the Midwest, right, at this time of great opportunity, right, through the Great Migration. But this really only benefits a generation of workers, right? This kind of expansive regional industrial powerhouse. And what we see is people are coming to the North with this expectation that they're going to have better life opportunities. They're going to get away from, Jim Crow. They're going to
yeah.
have all of this. And they run into the same issues and innovations on those same issues on the Midwest. And so we have this tension between the place of opportunity, the land where you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make good on the American dream, the promise of the American dream,
Mm,
while there is an outright ignoring of all of the impediments that are getting in the
right,
way.
right.
And worse yet, when Black people are falling below on all of the matrices of success, Black people are blamed for their own failures, right?
Right.
They are they are targeted because they did not make good on the promise. They didn't work hard enough, as opposed to looking at all the structural impediments that are getting in their way for those equal opportunities. And so that is the
Mm.
stew that this Midwest unrest begins to percolate in.
So then, why is the Midwest important for understanding the rebellions? I mean, as you just indicated, most people were, what would you say? shocked and surprised that you connecting Midwest to rebellions. So
I think you're
talk
very
about what history actually tells us about that relationship.
well. I mean, the first thing, and this is kind of a broader historiographic intervention, is that Black people in the Midwest have never been synonymous, but they need to be, right? And it's because Black people are always read as being in a space and not of a space, right? Black
Base, right?
in the Midwest are always read as being new arrivals and never building communities and never being multi
Yeah.
generational. That's the
Are
first thing,
shaping the culture.
or shaping the culture. The second thing is for Black people in the Midwest, other Black folk can never understand how we want to be here and that we like lay a claim to this, right? So we're like rendered invisible on both sides, like both by our regional counterparts and our racial counterparts.
Yeah.
And then when we look at Black culture in general, all of the people who are really shaping American culture are de-regionalized, right? Once Black folks begin to get to the national level of culture, they cease to be Midwesterners.
Right.
Just as an example of some folks, Gordon Parks, Langston Hughes, Toni Morrison, Stevie
Yeah.
Wonder, Prince, the list goes on and
Well,
on and on.
Ash, look, if we're honest in
Yeah.
terms of looking at the history, other than the South, right, our homeland, the Midwest has played the majority role in shaping our culture, our politics, especially our music and our consciousness. And the Midwest, because of its working class emphasis, has always tilted more toward radicalism than the Northeast. And we've generally had about the same population.
This is all correct. This is all correct, right? But because I think as American, we're so invested in this idea of a pastoral meritocracy, right?
Yeah.
The great American backyard that has to be rendered exclusively white to lay into that hype machine. That to think about Black radicalism, especially Black working class radicalism in the Midwest, would blow the whole myth up. And so I think you're exactly right on that. I think the other really critical part about centering this story in the Midwest, in addition to the fact that there are numerically more uprisings that are happening in the 12 states that make up the North Central region than any other region in the U.S.
Can
during
you
this.
repeat that?
So there are more uprisings that take place from 1965 to 1968 in the Midwest, so those are the 12 states that the census calls the North Central region, than there are in any other region in the US at this time, right? So as a number, more
Mm,
stuff goes down in the Midwest than anywhere else. So that's the first thing. And then if we're looking at these uprisings as Black working class political action, it makes sense that they are happening where Black people not only have Black working people not only have a lower standard of living to their white regional counterparts, they also have a lower standard of living than their Black counterparts in other regions with similar jobs, right? So,
except the South.
except for the South, right, where they're still engaging
Yeah.
in sharecropping, right, and
Yeah.
agricultural exploitation. Absolutely. But when compared to the Northeast and the West, right? And so you have all of these things. You're coming to a place where you said you're going to get to vote and you're going to get to have a house and your kids get to go to nice schools. And then you come to a place that not only does not give you those things, when you start agitating for the change, when you start asking for what you deserve as a citizen in this country, they say, well, just work harder. Or what do you mean it's not the same? You can have all these things. We don't have Jim Crow laws. We don't have this. And ignoring all of the ways that this
Hmm.
equity is snaking through the political economy.
I want to press you on some things that I think are both a product of the struggle, but also facilitated greater struggle so that obviously we all agree class matters. And I want to say that it matters whether you're in a factory with 2,000 other people working, um, industrial, steel,
Mm.
rubber, glass, right? Meat packing. Those kinds of jobs matter in terms of shaping consciousness and particularly in terms of shaping aggression in ways that being maids working in smaller factories in the Northeast doesn't create the same class consciousness in the same sense that we are equal to these motherfuckers, right? And I think that that gets lost, as well as what gets lost is that the struggles in the urban North, and particularly the Midwest, force concessions from white folks, human relations commissions. Now, we're not saying that these things produce change, but we can't do what Ryan Coogler does in Sinners, where he has Smoke say, Chicago ain't nothing but Mississippi with tall buildings. No, 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 no. It's different than that. Region matters, right?
Yes.
So, so can you speak to? Well, actually, let's get off that topic. I want you to talk about this aspect of the Midwest. So, most studies, most Black urban history, and most urban history is a single place, one city, and they do 20 years. They might do a generation. You did something exceedingly difficult. You're doing three cities: Cincinnati, Ohio, Omaha, Nebraska, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So the first question is, why did you do a multi city study? The second question is, what is it that we can learn from these smaller Midwestern cities? Because you could have did Chicago and Detroit, right? So what is it that you think we can learn from these smaller Midwestern communities that we haven't discovered in the studies of the larger Midwestern urban rebellions and the coastal rebellions, New York, LA?
Well, I mean, the first one is why do a city study? I mean, the
Yeah.
obvious answer is I lost my damn mind. I mean, like who, like why? Wild. No, and I mean, I think it offers so much more explanatory power than a single urban study, right? Especially if you want to make an intervention into regional things. And the Midwest as a region, in and of itself, is diverse, right? And so the three cities I chose were Cincinnati, which is this, kind of border South city.
Hmm.
It it has some issues. It also has one of the longest black community, lasting black
Yeah. Oh,
community.
yeah, absolutely. And it's had a rebellion virtually every generation since 1830.
Correct. It
Burned it down every generation.
I mean, right? Like you could write a whole book on them. They also, established the Black Codes, which would be
Yeah.
the, framework for Jim Crow, right? Like that is a Midwestern invention. So, like, that's what Cincinnati offers. Milwaukee, as Joe Trotter argues, is kind of one of these late pro, pro
Proletarianization.
thank you, proletarianization cities, right? So they don't have this kind of long history. They're right in the middle of the Great Migration and later. And Omaha is at the western edge of the urban Midwest, right? Like there are no more black folk in large numbers once you get past Omaha in the Midwest. There are
That is
communities,
correct.
and let's not get it twisted, right? There were black homesteaders in the late 19th century who had communities, but because of lots of decisions, those people had to leave their communities, their homesteads, and move to the cities by the time we get to the 1900s. And so this offers kind of a diverse picture of what is going on in the Midwest. And when you begin to look at three different cities, you begin to see all the patterns that are emerging, right? And this was a really big part of, and also why I want to talk about unrest, right? Because unrest is not the same as throwing bricks through windows, right? Unrest is this general political agitation that's going on. And I argue in the
Mhm.
book, this
The
is going on,
discontent.
the discontent. This is going on for decades
Yeah.
before any buildings burn, right? Before the Kerner Commission starts paying attention, right? People are having die-ins, they're having sit-ins, they're petitioning, right? So these uprisings are a continuation of this agitation in politics, just by different means. And so when you look at these smaller mid-sized cities, you begin to be able to trace these more carefully because there's not huge gaps along the class lines, right? There's not a large black middle or upper class
Mhm.
like you have in Chicago or in
Mhm.
Detroit. right?
Yeah.
There's not this kind of, lumpen or, like this
Yeah.
lower
Yeah. Yeah.
class of folks. Everybody's kind of black, working class. Everybody's living in the same community, right? That are, but so you
Hmm.
actually have a pretty concentrated mass to study, especially when you're using social movement theory frameworks, right? And so when you're looking at that, you can look at political opportunities. You can look at the ways in which people are mobilizing resources. You can look at these kind of main moments where people are getting politically activated and trace those in ways that big cities, which frankly have really been overstudied in some ways, are doing, right? Like when we think about the Black Midwest, we're talking about Detroit, we're talking about Chicago. Recently, we've been getting some Cleveland and St. Louis and Milwaukee in the mix,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. That's
that's not
it.
where Black people are living, right? Like Black
Right.
people are
Right.
in all of these cities, Kansas City, St. Louis,
Right.
Akron.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so
Yeah.
that is why I wanted to look at this. And then, so we have local organizing, we have this industrial class, and we also have this kind of liberal rhetoric that's going on is we want to help people. And so there's actually apparatuses in the cities, these human relations commissions, which are toothless, that
Yeah.
provide this
Yeah.
kind of perfect foil for the liberalism that kind of upends the broader Black freedom movement
Yeah.
struggle story. That it's just, Jim Clark in the South, and and these like kind of ardent racists in the North who complicate this Black freedom movement struggle picture because we're looking against the well-meaning go slow people, right?
Hmm.
And that
Hmm.
necessitates a different type of response, which tells a different Black freedom movement story.
Okay. Thank you. That was a wonderful explanation. Now, I want to kind of press you on terminology, conceptual framework. So, one of the most important things you do is you take on the question early on. I think in the first couple pages of the introduction, you start going after the political use of framing terminology. So you point out that we're seeing it today, literally, right? That they always go for this what they project as neutral language that actually erases those things that are harder, those things that are more oppressive. So you particularly point out the use of the terms civil disobedience and disturbance, that they erase the human intent of the Black working class in response to urban rebellion. And so you argue that we need to adopt, and you propose that these terms be used interchangeably, right? Uprisings, revolts, rebellions. So why is that language, those conceptions, um, preferable? What do they explain that the general newspaper, New York Times stuff don't?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, particularly after Floyd's murder in 2020, the AP came out with all of this like suggestions for how to use language, right? To say that we need to have neutral terms. There is never a neutral term. There's no such thing as being a neutral thing. Like let's call out our political intent from the outset. The second really important intervention that I want to make here is not to see like the state, right? And a lot of historians have been doing really smart work about this, of doing this kind of counter read to state records, right? So I'm looking at the Kerner Commission, I'm looking at arrest records, but not to replicate the violent language that the state is using to justify their own violence.
Hmm.
But for me, why disorder and disturbance and rebellion and revolt are so important because they denote political intent, right? So often when people talk about this unrest that I'm describing in my book, they can only conceptualize in two ways, right? Of people just out of pure rage going out into the streets and burning things down, right? Because that's just, quote, in their nature, or things coming to a boiling point and then simmering it down. What I want to address and to really hammer home is that this is a continuation of politics by another means. People
Hmm.
out into the streets because they thought there was something to gain. It was not idle. It was not blowing off steam. It was a political tactic to win a concession, right? And so when we use those words like rebellion and revolt, we show that this is a tactical way of addressing a long-standing harm and not just some one-off or some passionate response. It is strategic, it is intentional, and it is based from Black working class knowledge and not their emotion.
And of course, the term riot just needs to be struck from the
Come on,
lexicon in
we all know
regard to us.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Right. You know,
yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
that in and of itself, right? Like for me, that's always the red flag when someone says, "Oh, they're out there rioting." Like
Yeah,
we know who the they is, right? And
right,
never
right.
then used in other ways. It's always used to immediately criminalize, right? Which is what the
Yes,
state needs to do to round up and to squash these types of things, to immediately criminalize the people involved, and thus by immediately criminalizing them, you are immediately depoliticizing them. And that is what, as scholars, we cannot do.
absolutely. So I want to take up and, the last part of the book has the term Black Freedom Movement there. So, what are the dominant features of what's been called the Black Freedom Movement, and how did the urban rebellions open up space, right? And how did it transform the Black Freedom Movement, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think to really get at this question, it's important to think about how urban rebellions were talked about in prior, right? When you read these urban histories, when you read these, Black freedom movement studies, oftentimes the urban rebellions are like a declension moment, like a
Hmm.
downturn in overwhelmingly progressive narrative of we just keep marching and protesting the right way, and then we get our freedom. And yeah, there was 65 and yeah, there was 67, but that we're not going to talk about that. It's going to get a paragraph and we're going to keep it moving.
Hmm.
And that is wrong because what the rebellions do is they offer a transition between traditional civil rights organizing and Black power organizing. And I think
Absolutely.
this is the other really important thing that I could access by studying these small urban areas. There is far more overlap between those groups in small Black communities than there might be in a Chicago, right? So you see folks who are writing hard for these kind of traditional,
Hmm.
libertarian, egalitarian organizations in 66. They are out there in the streets advocating for the people, rebels who are participating in 67. And they are donating to Black movement organizations in 69, right? And so you see this continuation, and it's not
Hmm.
all the old heads died off and then the end of civil rights movement, and now we see the emergence of Black power movement with young people, right?
But
It's a,
is it a continuation or is it a transformation?
it's a
Meaning that
trend.
they don't continue doing the same thing. There's a transformation in why they do it, how they rationalize what they do, as well as some of the things that they do.
Absolutely. And what I always kind of think about is, in Cincinnati, they had a subgroup called the Cincinnati March for Jobs and Freedom, right? And they have Uncle Sam on their letterhead holding hands with Black and white people marching on the street, right? This is
Mm.
64. This is very much how they're orienting themselves as being having access to the American dream, right? That Black kids have access to great white schools.
Hmm.
Then we have the uprisings, and then we get to Black Power, where the demand is Black schools and Black communities need to be excellent and run by Black teachers and affirm Black students, right? And how we see this is in the transition of the uprisings. Because every uprising, there is a period of negotiation where the people who are participating say, this is what we want, these are the terms of our peace. And
Can you, I want you to delve into that because one of the things, even when it was a dissertation that that I found completely transformative, was the idea that in each of these rebellions, the people, the rebels, produced a document saying, "This is what we want."
yeah, it's hard to say people are just emotional and breaking things when they're angry, when not only do they produce a document of grievances, they have three different drafts of that document, right?
Yeah, yeah. Little thought went in.
Little thought, couple meetings. And so they are asking for jobs. They're asking for control of the institutions, or at least representation on the boards of the institutions which have an impact on their life, be it the housing authority, being it the police review board. They want in Cincinnati, they want black truck drivers in the black community. So it's a labor issue, right? And so people are saying it's not just enough for us to have access to your nice things. We want nice things in our community controlled by us, which is at the very core of Black Power ideology. And
Absolutely.
it also creates this kind of, I would say, this go for broke attitude that we see, right? And
Mm,
people are less willing. And I think this is where we see more of the generational gap. People are less willing to do a go slow approach. People are less willing to accommodate and play within the rules. There becomes this kind of aggressive, muscular form of nationalism, which is like here, all now. We want it all, and we're not going to wait. You give it to us. If you don't give it to us, we're going to build it for ourselves. And that is also representative in cultural forms. You know, like one of my favorite kind of discoveries was looking at yearbooks and year to year seeing, you know, black women's hair go from being like kind of press and curl
mm,
straighten to the women who are winning the beauty contest at high school, which we could unpack in a different way,
mm,
all having afros and long maxi dresses with dashikis, right? And we literally see this the summer after the uprisings. We see that radical transformation ideology represented by their sartorial, their dress decisions. And I think that is a very powerful way of thinking of urban rebellion's transformation from this kind of civil
mhm.
rights orientation to a Black Power orientation.
Yeah, no, that's very, very insightful. So, Ash, if I read you correctly, your major objective is, I think, is to bring to the forefront the way space, race, and specifically racial oppression, class and gender interacted to generate both external conditions and internal situations that gave rise to the rebellions, right?
Yeah.
But there's another part that you're engaged in, and I think you then explore those same social relationships in the context of the rebellions, right? So first I want you to discuss the multiple ways those social relationships work to create racial oppression, poverty, political subjugation, social isolation, cultural imperialism, and oppression. Then we'll move to the second part.
Yeah, so this is something, you know, because when I was writing the dissertation, I was thinking to myself, you know, three cities, that's not enough of a challenge. Let's get four, maybe five theoretical frameworks in there. Let's like really flex. Again, I lost my damn mind. Um, but I think it's really important, and you know, so many black feminist theorists teach us this, right? Like we don't live single issue lives, right?
Right.
People are participating in the political sphere at the intersection of their race, their class, their gender, their region, right? All of these things are factoring in. And what I was so, you know, delighted as a scholar, but kind of disheartened as a human to discover is how this really amplified intra-racial class issues, right?
Hmm.
And thinking about how, you know, middle class black folk are still kind of, you know, wheeling and dealing and trying to negotiate the politics, right? And so they are, in some cases, some of the people who, you know, I read their documents, they're believing the hype, right? Like that we just need to be patient and go slow. And they've kind of internalized this bootstrapping ideology and really encourage, you know, some working class black people to lay off and just to try harder. And so you see that on the side.
Are they also engaging in a critique of black behavior
Yes,
as
absolutely.
opposed to
And
structural analysis?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you thinking, and a lot of this is being born out of the Moynihan thesis, of black
Hmm.
matriarchy, and that dads aren't around and there's just all these wild boys out in the street. So that's certainly a part of it. And it's this idea that, like, we particularly see this generationally, because for older black people and many who had made it, who benefited from that first
Yeah.
generation of
Oh,
migration,
absolutely.
they their reference point is the South, right? And they're like, this is so
Yes,
much better. I'm
absolutely.
earning wages. I'm not earning script, right? I have my own
Yeah,
house. I'm not
yeah.
living in a sharecropper shack. But they're children, right? Like, there's a young man who was interviewed in Milwaukee at the time of the rebellion. He said, my daddy moved us here thinking he gave us heaven. My daddy doesn't know anything about black power, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, that is the other thing. Those young people who were born and raised in the Midwest have a completely different political orientation that rejects the cultural imperialism. So many other older people adopted. I don't know if they bought into it, but adopted as a form of safety and protection. And I think a genuine earnestness that things could be better if they just worked within the parameters of the system.
Well, I'm gonna say that I actually think that it was hegemonic for that generation. I remember my first job at 16 was as a youth organizer for a local Black United Front, and we were circulated a petition to name the largest Black park in the community after Malcolm X, and also to have a parking lot put in, right? And so I stopped at the president of the NAACP's home and, presented with the petition, and it turned into about a 30-minute conversation. But what stuck with me is that he said to me, I was a sharecropper in Brownsville, Tennessee. I came up here. I work at Wagner, which was a foundry. This foundry, I worked there for 2 weeks, I'm ashamed to say, because I only lasted 2 weeks, unlike my daddy who lasted 40 years. Anyway, you could literally stick out your hand and part the dirt so you could see, right? It was that kind of place. So that's what he's talking about. He said, but I've been able to buy a home, got two cars, and my daughter is attending the University of Illinois. And then he said, what more do you want?
Mm, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that characterized the generation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's easy to look with our presentist eyes, and wag a finger, but, like, they lived through some shit. Like, to put it
Yeah.
in
Oh,
the
yeah.
bluntest way, and when I think about my own parents, right, their hard work allows me to live the life of a mind, right? Like, I
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
had to worry about having food on the table, which is why I get to make my living reading and writing books, right? and
That's right.
and I think that is the freedom that second generation of kids in the Midwest could have, right? They did not have to struggle in the way that their folks did, so they could dream new freedom dreams, right? And I think that is a really key thing that happens in the Midwest because of that location change, right? That scenery shift. They have a whole new way of imagining freedom, that their folks didn't, and perhaps even some of the young people, their age mates in other places, had different types of freedom dreams.
You see, and I would argue that amongst that list of social relationships we talked about, generation is implicit in your book because generation matters, right? That's why Fanon said that each generation must find their mission and either fulfill it or betray it. So
Yeah.
I want to move on to the second part. And again, I'm thinking about that pioneering work by largely Black women on recovering, and then restitching Black women back into the historical narrative. So a number of people, going back to Betty Collier Thomas and V.P. Franklin, um, Kimberly Springer, Robin Spencer, Donna Murch, Ashley D. Farmer, Jasmine Young have recovered the role of Black women in the movement. You are recovering the engagement of Black women in the rebellions. I don't think anybody else has done that. I know
Yeah,
Jasmine is looking at Black women in armed struggle,
that's right.
but I think you're the only one. And what's shocking is that gender comes in two different ways, right? One, the masculinity thing, but also the role of women. Can you talk about the role of women in the rebellions?
Yeah. And, whenever I give interviews, I like to pull back the curtain a little bit for, folks who are working on master's thesis or dissertations or whatever. But I remember being a grad student and like having these like fever dreams of like dreaming about uprisings and like picturing myself needing to run up the hill so I could see what the women were doing. And like waking up, I'm like, Ashley, you sit down and you write the dang thing, or you go to sleep. You don't write while you're sleeping, like just do one or another. So this question of what the women were doing really consumed my thoughts in very real ways. And it's because it is such an archival gap, right? And it's one that I took the greatest pleasure in kind of pulling apart
Hmm.
because I was getting firsthand testimonies from women who were there and talking about it. And yet the records, they're not telling me all of this. And so like, and we know this, and Ashley Farmer talks a lot about this, these archival silences and
Hmm.
how we think about this because like women are self-reporting. Like they're like 10.7% in Detroit of the ones who are arrested, but
Yeah,
40% of Black women in Detroit are self-disclosing that they participated, right?
yeah,
And so this is going back to seeing like the state. When we only see people who are participating in rebellions as the folks who get arrested or folks
right.
who are engaging in other kind of criminal activities, we lose the broader meaning. And so, in
Yeah.
talking with women and looking to see what women were doing, we actually expand the uprisings, right? From being just a purview of young men to being whole community events. And those
But you also
stories
bring
blow my mind.
organization to it. By
Oh,
focusing
yes.
on the women, you see it as more organized.
Yes.
So can
Yes.
you
I mean,
elaborate on that?
yes, like Nurses in Avondale, which is the Black community in Cincinnati, the second night of the uprising, they are organizing an underground triage because people who are going into the hospital to get patched up are getting arrested at the end of the night.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
these Black nurses, Black LPNs, Black aides are helping out these kids who are going in to get it, right? You have women who are taking goods, right? And women are strategic, again, about when they're going on the street. They go out to the street when the National Guard goes back to their post to sleep. And so fewer women are getting arrested because they're going when there's less risk. And those women who are getting arrested, they're usually with a male partner and they're usually taking things that are related to, traditional gender roles. So diapers,
Household support. Yeah. Yeah.
vacuums, that type of thing,
Reproductive
right?
stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, smart stuff. And so like we see gender playing out in that way, and also even how police and city council are seeing women participants, right? And so we see this a lot in carceral studies that women who go outside of gender norms or even sexuality norms, right?
Hmm.
They are disproportionately punished. So Black women who were with groups of Black males, not just their husbands, right? But in a group of Black males, oftentimes those boys would get looting charges, and the woman would get a prostitution charge, right? Because or like public drunkenness, because clearly any respectable young woman would not be hanging out with boys, right? And so she must be quote loose. So we see things like that. And then even though women are out in the streets, all of the programming that comes out of these uprisings, right?
Right.
These
Right.
these wages of rebellion, these tangible benefits, benefit young men because they are the only ones that are
Overwhelmingly. Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
contemporary moment and in our moment as being the participants. And so really the only benefits or like the gains that women got from participating are the goods that they took themselves, right? And so
Hmm.
they are depoliticized And in so many of the interviews of, like sociologists on the street talking to
Yeah.
people, they always highlight the men's political
Right.
concerns or concerns about their family, and the women are always portrayed as accidental actors. Wrong place, wrong time, just got caught up in the melee,
Hmm.
have nothing to be upset about. And that was just like mind blowing to see how deeply ingrained these gendered stereotypes were and how that then carries over for the next 60 years because they're replicated in the archive.
Mm. So I now want to talk about another, probably even more than gender, uh, a hidden aspect of what happened during the urban rebellions. So you talk about white vigilantes armed coming into black communities, committing crimes, assault, uh, as a major factor of what happened in each rebellion. Can you
Correct.
talk
So
about that?
if we want to talk about outside agitators,
Yeah,
white folks are the OG outside agitators and uprisings. Like, full stop. Like, when you start breaking down, and I mean, like, I'm not saying anything new. The Kerner Commission knew this, right? Like, there are
yeah,
whole
yeah.
documents, but nobody talks about it because it disrupts what we think about these uprisings,
That's
right?
right.
And so, there's all of this investigation. Was this Russia? Was this, people being bussed in, black militants being bussed in? The people who were coming from outside the communities were white folks living in suburbia looking for a fight. The majority of people who are arrested with guns are white men from these communities. So they are coming out of their racially redlined areas, oftentimes places that have like special dispensations. So they're not actually a part of the city proper.
Right,
They've been
right. These
zoned to be
these
their own policy,
subdivisions. Yeah.
these subdivisions, and they're coming into the black community armed and looking for a fight. And they're
And
carrying
we're not talking
bioweapons.
about they're walking across the street. We're
Oh
talking about
no,
they're driving some miles.
they are
Yeah.
getting in their cars and driving 10, 15 miles and armed to the teeth. Like, one of the weapons that was confiscated was a bazooka, right? And so the fact that this did not become a riot in quotation like 1919, like, Bell Harbor or Bell Island,
Hmm.
like 43 in Beaumont, Texas, is amazing, right? It's actually a historical miracle because people are coming in and looking for a fight. But by and large, when the police stop them at these checkpoints to prevent black folk from leaving their communities, and they saw their guns, they would confiscate the weapons and turn them back
And turn
over.
them around. They're not arrested.
They're not arrested. Some
Yeah.
are when it's, blatantly obvious, but yes. And this like really just feeds into, again, this kind of gender discourse about the uprisings because there's
Yeah.
all of this, like this John Birch offshoot called Tact, Truth About Civil Turmoil. They're like feeding this, narrative that the actual goal of the uprisings is to kill all the white men, and then that way black men can take the women and children for themselves, right? Like, this is this like deeply pathological masculinity that is animating the actions of many white men during the uprising.
One of the things, and I want you to talk about the archives. You kind of mentioned it, those silences and gaps, but there's also some situations in which the archives aren't silent, but the researchers seem not to see. So one incident, and you had mentioned this to me when you were working on the dissertation, but I was doing research on the Floyd McKissick project that I have in Soul City. So I went to I believe it's the Nixon Library, Nixon
Oh,
Presidential Library, and
perfect.
so going through, because the FBI was out interviewing people on the streets as well as bringing people in to grand jury proceedings and all of that. So I'm looking at this document of the FBI's separate interviews that aren't included in the Kerner Commission report. And There's some old white dude who wrote a book on rebellion in Detroit who looked at those files. Then there were you, and then me. So from the 1960s until I went down there in 2014 or so, three people looked at the damn thing.
It's amazing. And like
It's frightening.
and truly, and this book was a slow roll for me, and I'm happy it was, because in some ways I could kind of ruminate on it. But like, I started this as a master's thesis back in 2004, and there were literally less than 10 recent historical accounts, plenty of sociological accounts, right, but less
Yeah,
than 10 histories on the uprisings, in which like
yeah,
every community had an uprising,
yeah,
and yet there are
yeah,
no histories written on it. And I mean, like, I think it's telling, because these events, I mean, like, they tell us so much about ourselves and this
yeah,
country, right? They bear, and I mean, in part, this is why I'm a scholar of violence, because there's no ambiguity when you study violence. You're either in or you're out. You're either a target of violence or you're a perpetrator of
yeah.
violence, and it lays those fault lines out very, very clearly.
But
Um,
yet, the scholarship has historically minimized the level of violence. And we don't have to get into, talking about structural violence. We're talking about just naked physical
yes, yes,
violence. The
and
scholarship. And so in these documents, my question to you is, how do you account for people who just simply look at the same stuff we looked at and don't see it,
yeah,
allegedly?
I mean, I think one thing is they want to tell a different story, right? And this project began, and again, it was labor I did not have to do as much by the time it was published, but it was labor that began by showing what happened in the uprisings wasn't the first strike. It was the culmination of years
Hmm.
of indignity and organizing. That's a story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell the story that depathologized Black people, right, and laid at the feet of the people who are actually responsible for this explosion. And you cannot tell that story unless you tell the story of these outside agitators who are coming in.
Yeah,
You cannot tell the story of the white men who would cruise in Black neighborhoods harassing Black women and girls, right?
that's
You
right.
cannot tell that story. And those stories are not stories that are in archives. Those are stories that
Yeah.
come when you talk to Black people about their experiences.
But some of that stuff does appear in police records. I mean, in other words, you went through some records that the traditional historians don't go through. But I want to use your last comment, to make a segue to a comment that Dr. King made and what I think about its relationship to what you have done. So King's using the outdated term riot in a 1968 speech that ironically is 3 weeks before his assassination. And he famously describes urban rebellions as, quote, the language of the unheard, unquote. Now, what I think you do is that you develop, and I would argue provide, a more sophisticated analysis terming the rebellions, quote, Black working class politics. So I want you to really lay out for us the evidence for arguing that the rebellions were not just a political response, but they are a form of Black working class politics characterized by structure, organization, and clear objectives.
Yeah. So when we think about, the in kind of the past 5 years, whenever someone starts gabbing about the right way to do things, right? And that's running for office or sending a petition or all of these fallacies that they use against, Black rebellion. Black working class people were trying that, and they were shut out in every meaningful way of participating effectively in the polity, right? We have moving from ward voting to at-large voting, right? So gerrymandering prevents Black working class people from electing representatives from their community.
Explain why at-large voting as opposed to ward voting disfranchises Black people.
So at the time, Black people are hyper concentrated because of racial redlining. So they can only live in certain neighborhoods in these communities. And so when you have at large voting, instead of each community voting a representative for city council, the winner who has the total community's vote, right? All of the different wards gets up. Whereas in the ward voting, Black people could choose their own representative of their ward and therefore have at least one voice representing their concerns. So that's the first kind of way that we see it. Second of all, another avenue for working class politics are unions. And Black people were systematically shut out of any meaningful engagement in unions in the Midwest, right? They tried, they just couldn't get in. And so this leaves a vacuum.
You talk about trade unions,
All of
or
them.
you also talk about industrial unions,
Industrial unions, trade unions,
the whole shebang.
the whole shebang, the whole shebang. Journeyman programs would undertrain Black workers. So even if they got their foot in to get positions, they were undertrained and therefore could never pass the test, right? Like all of these types of things. So that kind of traditional avenue for class agitation, and Horn writes about this in his book, that's gone. So Black folks can't petition there. And then the kind of chosen appointees on these human relations
Mm,
commissions, Black people are more concerned with keeping the peace and kind of being this, respectability politics anchor. And so they're not concerned with the things that working class folk are because of their
right, right.
class privilege. And again, class is fluid, and particularly amongst Black people, the difference between a Black working class person and a Black upper class person is quite slim when compared to
In terms of money,
in terms of
no,
money,
no,
in terms of access, right? Like
right,
there's some
right,
things, but they're still Black in America, right? So like
yeah,
that,
right, yeah.
it's a relationship to goods and services, right? Is the definition that I use. So when we have all of those things compounding, right, we can think of Black working class people as the quote unheard, right? Because all of these venues for agitating, for advancing their agendas are shut
Mhm,
off to them. But what Black working class people are doing is leveraging the organizations that they already have, right? And this became really, really evident in the aftermath of the uprising. So you have the newspaper, right? Editors are writing op-eds and saying like, it's unfortunate that that this had to happen to make the ridiculous known,
mhm,
right? And so it's saying like, yeah, we don't want people on the streets, but it's been time that we do this. We have the NAACP and the Urban League. They are doing bail support, right? They are going to the courthouse and they are agitating to get these kids out of jail. So these, you see this at churches, you see this in lodges and other fraternal organizations. You see this in, kind of the big four civil rights organizations that they are leveraging what little, class privilege, civic privilege that they
mhm,
have in support of the people. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we see of the politics of the unheard is those traditional leaders begin to read the room and they either step down from their positions or they defer to the young to
mhm,
them the voice. And I think most famously in Omaha, Mayor A.V. Sorensen meets with a group of young rebels instead of meeting with the NAACP. Like he's late to the meeting with the NAACP because he's meeting with these rebels. And in the uprising in Omaha in '66, although the NAACP had been, advocating for an unemployment office in North
mhm.
Omaha in the Black Enclave for like 3 years, after one weekend of the uprising, they got that office on a Tuesday, right? And so, like, it showed that this is a very powerful
Yeah,
mechanism
yeah, yeah.
and people knew what they wanted, right? So again, and I think, we lose sight of what Black community spaces looked like in the '60s and '70s. people are out on the streets, right? And not out on the streets,
Right.
engaging in illicit, but like
Well, no, no, we're an
people are
outside
thinking.
people
We're an
in that
outside people.
era. Yeah,
Well said, right? They're on their stoop. Young people are congregating, in parking
on
lots,
the corners. Yeah,
on the corners.
in
And so
parks.
people are
Yeah,
talking. They know what they want already. They have a sense of what they're going to agitate for, in part because organizations had already been doing it, and in part because they're having these conversations every day. And so it's easy to mobilize a response about what they actually wanted and have their demands heard that were different than the kind of mainstream liberal agenda that, major civil rights organizations were advocating for. And so that for me is why this is more nuanced, but still kind of captures the essence of what King was saying back in '68.
uh, to what extent do we see the emergence, well, two phenomena: the emergence of new organizations amongst the youth generation and the transformation of older generations, meaning that they become more militant, if not necessarily more radical,
You
as
know,
an outgrowth of the rebellions.
if I were to do a second book on rebellions, I think I would focus solely on high school rebellion.
Mm,
And this is in the aftermath of the big ones in the street. And, like if you look at a lot of the tallies of, uprisings, like the Lemberg Center at Brandeis and
yeah,
how,
yeah.
they're counting this, a lot of the later ones, so 1968 to 1972,
Hmm.
those are in high schools, right?
Yeah,
These,
yeah,
and oftentimes
yeah.
they are interracial conflicts. So for
Oh,
me, the
absolutely.
the youth are a critical part of understanding the back half of the Black freedom movement. And even when you look at Minneapolis today, right, the students had their school canceled because agents came on the property and
Hmm.
they stood their ground, right? And so, like, I think the youth has always been kind of a vanguard of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of that, when we look back to the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement, when we look to Ferguson, when we look to Baltimore, we have this deep historical misremembering, right? So we have the older generation saying, this isn't how we do things. We need to do things like King, forgetting the ways in which people agitated and oftentimes engaged in armed self defense. And then you have the
Hmm.
younger generation saying the same thing, but an opposite way, that this is not your grandmother's movement, right? And so in that, both groups are buying into the hype of this peaceful narrative of, the beautiful struggle and all of this, and forgetting that people like were pissed and they fought and they were willing to take major risks to bring about change. And so that is what I think. I think the youth, both, in the '60s and '70s, push the movement forward, push the older
Right.
generation forward, and those old folk, right? Like the old heads came around, right? Like they're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what's new, and we're going to leverage the privilege we have of being older or having some more resources or having more connection to support what y'all are doing.
One of the interesting things, and again, this is recalling from experience. Um, there's a wave of boycotts that from '63 on high school boycotts
Mm,
that sweep through. With one of the earliest and most definitive being in Chicago. But by the time we get to '68, '69 in Decatur, we decide to boycott. I think I'm a sophomore.
mm,
And the Black community at that time is much more centered on the retentions of African communalism.
mm,
So we make the decision we're walking out, but we have to participate in a community discussion with the old folks in the largest Black church on whether or not the community should support what we young folks are doing.
right.
And of course, as we described what it was like, they of course support us. But the point is that new organizations came out of that, but also some older groups transformed because there was still a connection, a communal connection between the youth and that older generation, as well as the activists in that generation, though we didn't necessarily agree on
Yeah,
strategy and tactics.
yeah, yeah. And I think again, it's that communal nature, right, of how people are interacting with each other and shared space
Yeah.
and this resource mobilization, right? Like if
Yeah.
everybody's going to the same church, like Deacon Elder so and so, right? And like he may squeeze you a little too tight, but like you gotta work with him. Like he might be a low key creep, but like you gotta work with him, and so
You, we had created a new organization that came out of the NAACP Youth Council, the Black Student Union, and one of the largest black church, the largest black church. We got access to their annex to run programs because we had a meeting with the minister, the pastor, and the secretary sent us in too soon. And as we walk in, he got his hand down this teenage girl's blouse.
I did not even know that story. But sometimes you know the story, you know the story.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But anyway, we're getting away with it. All right. We got to rein ourselves back in, Ash. We come back
there you
in
go.
to
There
focus.
you go.
All right. So um, I want to start moving toward the contemporary.
Great.
So let me check comments. Okay. So let me say this to the start formulating some questions because in the next 4 minutes I want to have Ash respond to questions. So
Gotcha.
here's my last question for you is this. Much has changed since the 60s. We were dealing with a declining industrial Fordist type economy. We're now under a neoliberal financialized global racial capital. It's a completely different political economy. They've succeeded in doing much of what Sam Yet argued in The Choice was coming surveillance. You can't walk, drive anywhere without a camera that they control. So, given the elimination of privacy, the passage of repressive laws that have severely restricted civil liberties and limited protest and how one can protest, and a fascist regime that's willing to invade other countries, black and brown countries, and not offer a pretense of we're bringing democracy, but say we want the oil. We come to get your natural resources, and a fascistic government that's willing to murder white women wither the future of black working class politics in this moment.
Well, I hope not. I hope not. We have so much work that needs to be done. And I mean, I think Doug McAdam always talks about tactical adaptation, right? Tactics that worked in the 60s, tactics that worked in 2020 may not necessarily work in 2026, right? Because the
Yeah.
state always has new responses. So I think it's important not for people to be complacent and think about what they did the last time and what moves forward.
Hmm.
Um, but I always have to believe in a brighter tomorrow. I always have to believe in the idea that working people, and not just Black working people, but all working people have the fruits of their labor, have what they want. And I hope that there is a moment, right, that we are beginning to build this kind of collective mass. We see the Fight for 15, we see the No Kings protest.
Hmm.
People are keyed in a way that I don't know they have been in the past decade, right? Like I really think
Yeah,
that
yeah. There's
we are
certainly a lull after the high tide the 60s and 70s. From 80 forward,
Absolutely,
it's been a lull. Yeah.
without a doubt. I mean, there were some good movements in there, but when
Yeah,
we
yeah,
think
but they're episodic.
and what for me, what I see is so, and it's so hard because it seems that the ground is always shifting, right? And what we thought we knew last week changes into this week. But the fact that affordability is now a key word, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
are beginning to see people concerned about the things that Black working people have always been concerned with, right? And I pray that this is a moment where we can find the commonality in a shared struggle to work towards equality, to work towards us having the things that we deserve as humans, and not take this as an opportunity fight each other for resources, right? Because
Right.
you know we are stronger together than we are apart. So I keep dreaming radical freedom dreams, and I hope everybody else is as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley, for a truly enlightening discussion. And before I try and find some comments here, do you have any announcements?
Oh
Anything you want to
gosh.
share?
Um, I mean, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this in the new year. Tis the season for the new year. But just really thinking about like what sustains us, right? Like what
Hmm.
brings us hope, how we think about community, how we think about mutual aid. And I hope everybody who's listening like has that thing that like brings them joy and reminds them of their humanity. Because I think
Hmm.
in human times, it's so easy to lose sight of that, and then
Yeah,
it becomes easy to give up, right? Like a nihilism, a sense of hopelessness. And so having the things that bring you joy, having the people that you want to fight for and with, I think for me is what helps me do this work every day, because I know why I'm doing this. And so I've been thinking that that's not really an announcement, but that's been on my heart. Like, do people have good recipes that they like cooking? Are you reading good
hmm,
books? Is there a
hmm.
song that makes you want to dance? Like in a environment that is predicated on our constant dehumanization, never lose sight of what makes you human.
That's right. That's right. So I've got a couple of questions here. Let me, I'm about to put on my glasses, reading
I need to take mine
glasses.
off for that. Yep.
So Chiante Selle, 1870, wants to know, how should us young organizers deal with running into the liberal orgs that weaponize radical energy into democratic lanes?
Whew.
Those folks who tell us we got to vote.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't have to vote, but it ain't the
Right.
solution. Yeah.
Vampires are real, right? Not just in sinners, but in our real organizing lives as well. Um, I think with all things is making sure that your organization, your comrades, prioritize the things that matter to you, right? And show up when it is advantageous for you, and let those people do their thing, right? Not to let them co-opt your energy, your hopefulness, and think about your engagement with them strategically, right? Like, when does it make sense for y'all to come together for a united front? And when does it make sense for them to do the work that they're doing and for you to do the work that you're doing? I think is my best advice, because I think we all have work to do, but we
Hmm.
really need to be keyed into what our strengths are and where we can be most effective, and who are the people who are sucking that lifeblood from us, and let them take that energy elsewhere. That's a great question.
So I got a question from Red Sea, who wants to know if you use police archives for your research.
A little bit. You might be surprised to hear, or not, that police archives are difficult. So, with the exception of capital cases, they throw out everything. Um, But
Now,
like,
are you including court records? Or are you specifically talking about just police archives?
just police archives by and large. Court records are a little dicier. They'll have the proceedings, but they often don't have the testimonies.
Right.
Um, then we can get like real messy with it. Sometimes these things just disappear. So, like, I'm working on my second book, and the folder is just missing from the Library of Congress. Like, it's in index,
Really?
yes, but it's just missing. So, the best police records I had access to are the ones that the police sent to the Kerner Commission and then got filed away in the Presidential Library, and the self-promotional police stuff. So they kept like a compendium of all of their arrests broken down by race. So like how many people their police dogs bit by race.
So that's how
Again,
you got the white vigilantes.
correct. So like
Yeah.
that's how I found that. And then so there's that. And then there's and then like you just build connections within community. And one day somebody called my cell phone and I answered it. And he said my name, and I was like, okay, this is creepy. He's like, I'm an ex-firefighter, and when they were clearing out the old headquarters, they just dumped all the files in there. And so I went dumpster diving and grabbed a whole bunch of them if you want to meet me to see them. You see me standing here, so it ended up okay. But he had all the 911 transcripts. So all the 911 transcripts from the uprisings they threw away, he saved them, heard what I was working on, and went from there. So
And so often research really does turn on ordinary people making a decision to give you stuff that they shouldn't,
yes,
right?
yes,
Absolutely. So
yes,
here's another question. And this is asking you to talk about what the working class Black community looked like in the 60s, 70s.
yeah. So it depends on the community. In Cincinnati, it's largely P&G, so the people who make toothbrushes, Procter and Gamble, toothbrushes, soap, that type of thing. So they're working in this light industry. Milwaukee, it's more heavy industry like steel and machining, and then in
Foundries, yeah.
foundries. In Omaha, it's meat packing. So these are working class people, but they are we all it always gets messy when you say skilled versus unskilled labor because all
Right,
labor is skilled, right? So, but these folks had a little bit more kind of skill than just like custodial staff or
right.
whatever. However, at this moment in the years like 63, 64, we begin to see the decline of these industries. And this is, an industrial decision. So I think with meatpacking, we see it the best. Instead of having horizontal or vertical, right? So you bring the cow in, you slaughter the cow, you do all
Mhm.
the steps. They make it a horizontal practice and they decentralize it to Omaha out to rural Nebraska. And so the
Mm.
white workers who are working in like the big four meatpacking companies all left. So the white workers who are working this labor had access to new training opportunities, whereas the black workers had nothing. And then they kind of fall into that strata of unemployment who have no prospects either. So that's kind of what they look like. But they have churches, there some of them are homeowners, they have organizations. So they're not this kind of destitute population. They're just one paycheck closer to poverty as opposed to like three paychecks away from poverty.
One of the things I like that I'm inferring from that is that there is a group of scholars who presume that the Black working class is incapable of self organization. So they always want to talk about the petty bourgeoisie having to organize the Black working class. But the Black working class has its own organizations and own organizational capacities. So another question that you have is a question about how do we engage in revolutionary joy that is not consumer based and further destroys the planet and our global South family? You've addressed some of that, but
I
can you hit it again?
love, I love, love, love this question. So many different ways. It all depends on what your jam is. So like I go hard for my public library. I love them. They have great events. They obviously have books. They have records. They have DVDs. They have streaming stuff. So like that's my joy, and I'm not buying books, and I can read broadly. I love that. Nature. I have mixed feelings about nature. But lots of people like to hike. Lots of people like to snowshoe. I'm clearly not one of those people. So that's like another thing. And like I gain great satisfaction from being in community. So, I have potlucks with my people, you know, they play music, I listen to their music. And so like for those types of things, that costs no money. And I think this is a really important distinction that you're bringing up, right? This idea that self care is that I have to drop like $100 on like a mani pedi. No, can I tell you all what the best form of self care is? Two letters, No. No, just say
Yeah.
no. Say no to
Yeah.
your children, say no to your parents, say no to your boss. Like, y'all have to do that discriminatingly. But, like, just to reclaim some of your time for yourself, just to sit and just to be with yourself and your thoughts is perhaps some of the best that you can do. And engaging in like revolutionary joy and our humanity is prioritizing ourselves and our time. In fact, I have that up in my office. Reclaim my time from Maxine Waters, like up there as a reminder.
Now, we go to 8:30, and
Okay.
I like to be tight on the time, but also we've got three questions, and I
I'll get
feel
them in
like if
10.
someone has sat through, they should get their question answered. So let me, and this question is similar to the last, but it's what happens when they reject what matters to you, like your humanity.
That is great and powerful. On one level, like I want to think to myself, I don't care what they think about me, but when it's an actual threat to myself and to my community, that is real. Years and years ago, right around the time Philando Castile was murdered, there was a conference in Minneapolis that I was a speaker at, and we marched and they chanted, all my life I've been trying to fight, but you can't steal my joy. And I think about that often, right? You can't steal my joy. I cannot let someone take my humanity because then I am complicit in that. And so I try to remember the people who value me and my work and what I hold dear, and to drown out all the noise. And that's hard. That is a hard thing to do, but to always be affirmed by the people who matter to me and not the ghouls that are out there.
All right, last question. And this is a question getting at the class distinctions you've discussed. And so, uh, Ubisoft 2005 says he's just wondering how you put this in juxtaposition to many Black workers gaining middle class status with government jobs. Feel like they didn't as much as previous generations.
Yeah, yeah, that's tough. That's tough because sometimes I want to imagine my own life where I just think about, am I going to get the porterhouse steaks or am I going to get the fillets, right? And not have to be in the struggle, right? Like, does there come the time when we ever just get to rest on the work that we've done and the generations that have come? I get jealous of the people who concern themselves about the petty things that I don't regularly think about. And so I do think there's some complacency. I do think there's a genuine sentiment that those fights have been fought and won, and we don't have to revisit them. But what we keep learning the past 5 years is that it's never over, right? Supreme Court decisions are getting overturned. And so we always have to be ready to take up the fight again. And I think what happened with, a lot of access to these middle class jobs, and, higher education and a lot of these types of things, we became dissociated from these struggles. And I think, as I opened with earlier, I think they're all going to come to a head in in rapid succession. And I think we're all going to have more in common with each other, even if we have white collar jobs or PhDs, right? I think about student loans, right? Like that pathway, now that there is limited access to how much money families can take out, that is going to cause a serious gap in the haves and the have nots. And so, yeah, I think that lay time that Cindyada talked about, right, from 84 to the present, like it just didn't seem as immediate and as present. And I think that is now ratcheting up. So I think it's a generational shift that we're in the midst of.
Okay, we're going to bring this to a close. I do want to make a very quick comment on that question. That there's only two areas in which civil rights and Black Power movement laid out improved the quality of life for Black folk, and one of those is, of course, in representation, putting people in elected positions, which hasn't necessarily been as transformative as we hope. In fact, it just hasn't. But more importantly, these government jobs, public sector jobs, is the most transformative aspect that came out of the movement in terms of material conditions. And most of those people are not working middle class jobs. The the postal people, those are working class jobs. They simply pay union scale wage. So that's one way we got to look at it. And of course, the other way is understand that it's in the public sector that we're waging a number of unionized battles. And so let's try and think about how we can find the revolutionary kernel within every aspect of the situation we're in. And with that, I want to say, Ash, I appreciate you. Thank you. And
Thank
we're
you.
going to end the live stream. Take
Awesome. Thanks,
care.
everybody.
And thank you, everyone who joined. Take care. And see you in 2 weeks.
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.